Take her! Ah!
Blood dripped from iron chains holding her fragile wrists. Betrayed by greedy parents, Isolde awaited her grim fate. Cold wind howled through ancient stones. Suddenly, heavy footsteps silenced every whispering voice. A massive, snow-white warrior stepped forward, his crimson eyes locking onto hers. "I'll take her," he growled. To be born without a wolf in the brutal, medieval lands of Oakhaven was a tragedy. To be born without a wolf, bearing snow-white hair and mismatched eyes, one a striking violet, the other piercing silver, was considered an absolute curse. Isolde Sterling knew she was a disappointment from the moment she could understand human speech. Her parents, Lord Reginald Sterling and Lady Beatrice Sterling, were proud, pure-blooded Lycans who ruled over the verdant valleys of the southern pack. They were obsessed with legacy, power, and appearances. Isolde, their firstborn, offered none of those things. While other children shifted under the light of their first full moon, Isolde merely sat in the grass, shivering and remarkably human. By her 20th name day, her parents' whispered shames had turned into glaring resentments. The Sterling family had fallen on desperate times. Lord Reginald had made terrible wagers with a neighboring territory lord, Alistair Croft, a vicious alpha known for his cruel methods and his penchant for collecting oddities. The debts were astronomical, and Alistair had threatened to march his army across Oakhaven's borders, burning everything in his path. Faced with ruin, Reginald and Beatrice made a sickening choice. They would not surrender their lands. They would surrender their daughter. It happened on a night thick with fog and the scent of rotting leaves. Isolde was dragged from her chambers by her own father's guards. She didn't scream. She had learned long ago that screaming in Oakhaven only brought harsher punishments. She was thrown into the back of a wooden cart, dressed in little more than a burlap shift. Her mother stood on the stone balcony of their keep, face completely devoid of emotion, turning her back as the cart rolled away. That cold turn of a mother's shoulder broke something profound inside Isolde, shattering the last fragments of a child's desperate hope for love. They took her to the Blackwood, gathering a subterranean, supernatural flesh market carved deep into the caverns beneath the neutral territory of the Iron Ridge. It was a vile place, reeking of rust, unwashed bodies, wet fur, and despair. Torches sputtered against the damp cavern walls, casting long, demonic shadows over the faces of the buyers. Rogues, exiled nobles, and dark magic practitioners. Isolde was shoved onto a wooden auction block. The chains around her wrists were heavy, biting into her delicate skin. The auctioneer, a greasy man named Bartholomew, grabbed a handful of her white hair and yanked her head back, displaying her mismatched eyes to the jeering crowd. "Behold, an anomaly of the bloodlines," Bartholomew shouted over the din. "A pureblood born empty. No wolf, no bite, but unbroken and resilient, perfect for labor, or as a conversation piece for your grand halls." The bidding started low. Disgusting men shouted meager coppers. Isolde kept her eyes locked on the dirt floor, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Then, a familiar, arrogant voice cut through the noise. 50 gold pieces. Isolde's head snapped up. Pushing through the crowd of filthy rogues was Lord Alistair Croft. He looked up at her with a predatory, sickening grin. He didn't want her for labor. He wanted her to humiliate her family further, to use her as prey in his twisted hunting games. 50 gold pieces for the sterling reject, Alistair sneered, tossing a heavy leather pouch onto the auctioneer's table. "I need a new fox for my hounds to chase." Bartholomew's eyes widened with greed. 50 gold. Going once to Lord Croft. Going twi. The temperature in the cavern plummeted. It wasn't a gradual chill. It was an instantaneous, bone-deep freeze that coated the iron bars of the nearby cages in a thin layer of frost. The torches flickered wildly, turning from orange to a ghostly blue. The raucous chatter of the Blackwood gathering died in an instant, replaced by the collective, terrified holding of breath. Footsteps echoed against the stone. Slow, methodical, heavy, The crowd parted like water, men and women pressing their backs against the damp walls to avoid touching the newcomer. Isolde squinted through the dim light. Stepping into the clearing before the auction block was a man of colossal proportions. He stood well over 6.5 feet tall, wrapped in thick furs of dire wolves and bears, but it was his appearance that stole the breath from Isolde's lungs. His hair was as stark white as her own, cascading over broad, armored shoulders. His skin was pale, almost translucent in the torchlight. And his eyes, when he lifted his head to face the stage, were a terrifying, luminescent crimson. Whispers broke out in terrified hisses. The ghost of the north, the winter wolf, King Cassian, the albino alpha king of the Frost Peak Mountains. A legend whispered to frighten pups into obedience. It was said he was born cursed, an albino outcast who slaughtered his way to the throne of the most brutal territory in the realm. He was known to be merciless, ruling his icy domain with an iron, blood-soaked fist. Alistair Croft puffed out his chest, though his hands trembled slightly. Frost Peak is far from home, King Cassian. This merchandise is mine. Cassian didn't even look at Alistair. He kept his head tilted slightly toward the stage. He inhaled slowly, his chest expanding beneath his heavy furs, taking in the scent of the cavern. When he finally spoke, his voice was a deep, gravelly rumble that vibrated through the very stone beneath their feet. 200 gold. The cavern erupted in shocked gasps. Alistair's face turned purple. This is an insult. That is a hollow shell of a woman. A worthless null. You insult my claim, Cassian. Cassian finally turned his massive head toward Alistair. The sheer, suffocating pressure of his alpha aura slammed into the room, driving several weaker werewolves to their knees. Alistair stumbled backward, choking on his own breath. Your claim, Cassian growled softly, is dust. He stepped up to the auction block. The auctioneer, Bartholomew, was visibly shaking, too terrified to speak. Cassian reached out with a massive, gauntleted hand and gripped the iron chain binding Isolde to the post. With a sharp, effortless yank, the thick metal links snapped like dry twigs. Isolde flinched, expecting to be struck, expecting the monster of the north to drag her by her hair. Instead, Cassian stood before her. He towered over her trembling form. He reached out, his bare, scarred fingers hovering an inch from her frozen cheek. I'll take her, the albino, Alpha King growled. He unclasped his massive outer cloak of black bear fur and threw it over Isolde's shivering shoulders, completely enveloping her in his warmth and the scent of pine, snow, and ancient power. Then, without another word to the stunned crowd, he turned and led her out into the freezing night. The journey to Frost Peak was a grueling test of endurance. Isolde rode on the back of a massive black destrier, seated in front of Cassian. For 3 days and nights, they rode through treacherous mountain passes where the snow was deep enough to swallow a man whole. Throughout the journey, Cassian barely spoke to her. He was a wall of muscle and stoic silence behind her. Yet, whenever the biting wind grew too fierce, she felt his arm tighten securely around her waist, his body heat acting as a shield against the lethal cold. Isolde was profoundly confused. She had been sold to a monster, yet this monster made sure she ate the best cuts of dried meat from their rations and commanded his elite guards to set up her tent near the hottest part of the fire every night. On the 4th day, the clouds parted to reveal the Frost Citadel. It was a breathtaking, terrifying fortress, carved directly into the side of a jagged glacier. Towers of dark stone and enchanted ice pierced the sky, overlooking a massive valley where thousands of Frost Peak wolves lived in a harsh but fiercely loyal society. As they rode through the massive iron gates, the courtyard fell silent. Hundreds of lichens stopped their work to stare. They didn't stare at their king. They stared at the tiny, white-haired woman draped in his furs. Cassian dismounted smoothly and reached up, wrapping his large hands around Isolde's waist to lift her down. As her boots hit the icy cobblestones, a man approached them. He was tall, with severe features, dark hair, and a jagged scar running down the side of his neck. "My king," the man said, bowing stiffly. "You return victorious from the southern borders, but what is this?" Gideon. Cassian acknowledged his beta with a curt nod. This is Isolde of House Sterling. She is under my direct protection. Have the East Wing chambers prepared for her. Gideon's eyes darkened with disdain as he looked Isolde up and down. He leaned in closer to Cassian, lowering his voice, though Isolde's sharp hearing picked it up perfectly. A Sterling? Sire, they are deceitful southern scum, and she possesses no wolf. She is a null. Why bring an abomination into the citadel? She brings ruin. A low, menacing snarl vibrated in Cassian's chest. You question my judgment, Gideon? Gideon immediately submitted, baring his neck slightly. Never, my king. I only seek to protect the pack. Her safety is absolute, Cassian commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. Have the healers attend to her wrists. Over the next few weeks, Isolde lived in a state of suspended terror and luxury. Her chambers in the East Wing were opulent, heated by massive hearths that burned day and night. She was given dresses of fine wool and silk, far better than the rags her parents had kept her in. Yet, the castle was a labyrinth of hostility. While Cassian protected her, he was often away dealing with territory disputes, leaving Isolde to navigate the icy glares of the castle staff and the outright venom of Gideon. Gideon made it his personal mission to remind her of her place. He assigned her menial tasks, sorting through dusty archives, cleaning out the aviary, subtle humiliations meant to break her spirit. But Isolde, accustomed to a lifetime of abuse from her own family, bore it with quiet dignity. It was during one of these tasks that she discovered Cassian's greatest secret. Late one evening, Isolde was carrying a stack of ancient ledgers to Cassian's private study. The door was slightly ajar. She nudged it open, stepping into the dimly lit room. Cassian was standing by the window, staring out at the blizzard raging outside. Set the books on the desk, Isolde, he said, without turning around. She froze. She hadn't made a single sound. How did you know it was me, Your Grace? Cassian finally turned. The firelight caught his crimson eyes. For the first time, Isolde noticed a slight, milky glaze over the vivid red irises. He didn't look directly into her eyes. His gaze was fixed just slightly over her shoulder. Your heartbeat, he replied smoothly. It flutters like a trapped moth whenever you enter a room I am in. And your scent, lavender, old parchment, and fear. Isolde took a step closer, realizing something that made her breath hitch. You aren't looking at me. A bitter smile touched the corner of the Alpha King's mouth. The curse of the albino wolf. My beast sees perfectly in the dark, tracks a drop of blood across 10 miles of snow. But in my human skin? The light is a blinding fog. I am all but blind, little bird. Isolde gasped, dropping a ledger. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. The fearsome king of the north, the most terrifying warrior in the realm, was blind. If the rival Alphas knew, Isolde whispered, terrified by the sheer weight of the vulnerability he had just exposed to her. They would march on Frostpeak tomorrow, Cassian finished for her. He walked slowly toward her, his movements fluid and precise, guided entirely by sound and scent. He stopped mere inches away. You are the only person outside of Gideon, and the High Healer who knows this. I bought you at that market, Isolde, because my wolf went mad the moment you entered the cavern. My beast demanded you. But I am a man of logic. Tell me, daughter of Sterling, why did my beast claim a null? I don't know, she whispered, her heart pounding. I am nothing. A mistake. Cassian reached out, his fingertips gently tracing the line of her jaw. Nature does not make mistakes of this magnitude. Determined to understand her own existence and prove to the Citadel that she wasn't a curse, Isolde began using her time in the archives to research the ancient texts of Oakhaven and Frostpeak. Gideon, distracted by border skirmishes, left her largely to her own devices. Weeks turned into a month. Isolde spent her nights poring over decaying scrolls written in old lichen. One stormy night, hidden in the deepest corner of the castle's catacombs, she uncovered a sealed, iron-bound tome titled The First Bloodlines. As she cracked the brittle pages open, a drawing caught her eye. It was an illustration of a woman. The woman had stark white hair, and the text explicitly detailed her eyes. One of the twilight sky, one of the polished blade, violet and silver. Isolde's hands shook as she read the translation beneath the drawing. They are not empty. They are vessels. The nulls of the mismatched gaze carry no beast because they are the anchors of the goddess herself. They are the true oracles, capable of mending the fractured minds of feral alphas or shattering the bloodline of those who seek ruin. To harm one is to invite famine. To love one is to conquer death. She wasn't a cursed reject. She was an oracle, a genetic rarity unseen in 500 years. Her parents hadn't sold a broken wolf. They had sold the most powerful asset in the Lycan kingdom for a bag of gold. Before Isolde could process the magnitude of her discovery, a cold, sharp voice echoed through the damp archive walls. So, the little rat finally found the cheese. Isolde spun around. Gideon stepped out of the shadows, a cruel, triumphant smirk twisting his scarred face. In his hand, he held a long, silver-coated dagger poison to any Lycan, and deadly to a human. "I knew you were dangerous," Gideon sneered, stepping closer. "Cassian is blinded by his beast's obsession with you, but I see you for what you are. A southern trick." I intercepted a missive. "Isolde, your father, Lord Reginald, is marching with Alistair Croft's army toward our southern pass as we speak. They used you as a distraction." "No!" Isolde backed away, clutching the ancient book to her chest. "My parents sold me. They hate me. I know nothing of an army." "It doesn't matter," Gideon said coldly, raising the dagger. "You are the weakness our king cannot afford. I will kill you tonight, dump your body in the glacier, and tell Cassian you fled back to your family. The king will be furious. He will march south, and he will slaughter Alistair and your treacherous parents. Frost Peak will be secure." Isolde hit the cold stone wall, nowhere left to run. Gideon lunged, the silver blade gleaming in the dim light. The silver blade sliced through the damp, freezing air of the catacombs, aiming directly for Isolde's heart. Time seemed to fracture, slowing to a devastating crawl. She saw the malicious triumph twisting Gideon's scarred face, saw the lethal gleam of the poisoned metal, and felt the icy breath of impending death. She had survived 2 decades of emotional starvation, the betrayal of her parents, and the auction block of a subterranean flesh market, only to be murdered in the dark by a jealous beta. Instinct, ancient and dormant, finally snapped awake. Isolde didn't scream. She didn't cower. She threw her hands forward, palms facing the treacherous Lycan. A sound like shattering glass echoed through the massive cavern. It wasn't physical glass, but the very fabric of the air breaking apart. A blinding, concussive wave of violet and silver energy erupted from Isolde's trembling hands. It struck Gideon square in the chest with the force of a falling meteor. Gideon was violently thrown backward, his boots entirely leaving the stone floor. He flew across the expanse of the archive, crashing spectacularly into a towering shelf of ancient ledgers before violently hitting the granite wall. The impact cracked the stone. The silver dagger, still clutched in his hand, superheated in an instant. Gideon released a blood-curdling howl of agony as the weapon melted into a pool of glowing slag, searing his flesh to the bone. Isolde collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. Her veins pulsed with a faint, bioluminescent glow, the same violet and silver hues that danced within her mismatched eyes. The heavy, iron-bound tome, the first bloodlines, lay open before her, its pages softly illuminated by her residual magic. Before the dust could even begin to settle, the massive oak doors of the archive were blown entirely off their iron hinges. They splintered into 1,000 pieces, crashing to the floor. The Alpha King stood in the ruined doorway. The temperature in the room plummeted to an absolute, unnatural 0. Frost exploded across the walls in jagged webs. He had not shifted, but his sheer, suffocating aura was that of a colossal, enraged beast. His chest heaved, his crimson eyes scanning the room. Though his human vision was clouded by the blinding fog of his curse, His beast could smell the melted silver, the ozone tang of raw magic, and the undeniable scent of his beta's blood mixed with the intoxicating, terrifying scent of Isolde's power. Gideon. The king's voice was a guttural, demonic rumble that shook the loose stones from the ceiling. The beta, coughing up blood, tried to drag his broken body across the floor. My king. Sire, listen to me. She is a spy. Lord Reginald and Alistair Croft march on our southern pass at this very moment. I was trying to protect the pack. The Alpha King crossed the room in 3 massive strides. He reached down, grabbing Gideon by the front of his leather armor, and hoisted the massive werewolf into the air with one hand, as if he weighed nothing more than a ragged doll. You raised silver in my halls, the king whispered, his tone far more terrifying than a roar. You brought poison near my mate. Gideon's eyes widened in sheer terror, his legs kicking uselessly in the air. Mate? Sire, no. She is a null. She is mine, the Alpha snarled, his fangs elongating. And for your treason, you are stripped of your rank, your name, and your pack. You will be cast into the glacier of the damned, where you will freeze for eternity, fully aware, fully alive. He threw Gideon to the elite royal guards who had just rushed into the corridor. Take this filth out of my sight. As the screaming traitor was dragged away, the king slowly turned his massive frame toward Isolde. The terrifying aura of the Alpha immediately vanished, replaced by a profound, trembling vulnerability. He dropped to his knees before her, ignoring the shards of broken wood and ice on the floor. Isolde, he murmured, reaching out with scarred, trembling hands, guided only by the sound of her rapid breathing. Are you harmed? No, she whispered, her voice shaking with adrenaline and awe. I am not what they said I was. She picked up the ancient book, pressing it into his massive hands. I am not a null. I am an oracle. The bloodline was never dead, only dormant. The Alpha King's sightless eyes widened. The legends of the oracles were woven into the very foundation of Lycan mythology, beings of immense power who acted as anchors to the moon goddess herself, capable of breaking curses and mending feral minds. Isolde reached up, her small, delicate fingers gently tracing the hard lines of his jaw before resting softly over his closed eyelids. Let me help you, she whispered. She closed her eyes and pulled upon the deep, welling reservoir of power she had just discovered. A warm, golden violet heat pulsed from her fingertips, seeping through his skin and into his skull. The Alpha King gasped, his massive hands gripping her waist. He felt a searing, brilliant pain behind his eyes, followed by a sensation of immense, rushing water washing away a lifetime of fog. Slowly, his eyelids fluttered open. The milky glaze that had cursed his human form since birth was entirely gone. His irises were a sharp, flawless, luminescent crimson. He blinked once, twice, adjusting to the sudden, overwhelming sharpness of the world. He saw the texture of the stone walls, the dust motes dancing in the torchlight, and finally, he looked down. He saw her. He saw the striking contrast of her snow-white hair against the dark furs, the delicate curve of her cheek, and the breathtaking beauty of her violet and silver eyes. A choked, emotional sound escaped the fearsome warlord's throat. He pulled her against his massive chest, burying his face in her hair. I can see you, he breathed, his voice breaking. By the goddess, you are more beautiful than the moon itself. But their tender moment was violently cut short. The deafening, ominous blast of the war horns echoed through the citadel. It was a jagged, frantic rhythm. The Southern army had breached the pass. The Southern Pass was a graveyard of jagged ice and treacherous ravines. By the time the Alpha King and his elite vanguard arrived, the snow was already stained deep crimson. Her power-hungry father, her cruel mother, and the sadistic Lord Alistair Croft had not come alone. They had emptied their coffers to hire the Iron Mercenaries, a notoriously ruthless human faction led by Captain Gower. Armed with silver-tipped arrows and wolfsbane, the mercenaries unleashed a lethal storm upon the Frostpeak wolves. Watching from a high glacial overlook, her parents cowered in an armored carriage while Alistair laughed maniacally, ordering his men to focus their silver fire on the Alpha King. The king charged into the fray, shifting into his true form, a colossal, 8-foot-tall albino direwolf. He was a god of war made of muscle, fur, and rage. Free from his blinding curse, he was utterly untouchable, tearing through the mercenary lines with brutal efficiency. But Captain Gower signaled a massive volley. Hundreds of silver arrows blotted out the pale sun, arcing directly toward the gigantic white wolf. Before the lethal rain could strike, a blinding flash of violet light illuminated the valley. Isolde rode onto the highest ridge, her midnight cloak billowing in the freezing wind. Raising her hands to the sky, she unleashed the oracle's song. A resonant, magical hum vibrated through the marrow of every living creature on the battlefield. As the magical frequency hit the descending arrows, the glowing silver underwent a violent alchemical reaction, turning instantly into heavy lead that shattered harmlessly against the snow. A shockwave of restorative golden energy pulsed from Isolde, instantly knitting the wounds of the Frost Peak wolves. Empowered by their oracle, the northern pack let out a terrifying, unified howl and overwhelmed the southern forces in seconds. Alistair panicked and attempted to flee, but the massive white direwolf intercepted his horse. There was no grand duel. The Alpha King shifted to his human form and, with one brutal, agonizing strike, snapped the tyrant's neck, ending his sadistic reign forever. The remaining mercenaries immediately dropped their weapons in surrender. Silence fell over the bloody snow. Isolde rode down the slope, stopping before the armored carriage. Royal guards dragged her parents out, throwing them to their knees in the frozen mud. "Isolde!" Her father wept, desperately begging for mercy. "We love you. We are your family." Isolde looked down at them, her mismatched eyes glowing with cold finality. "You despised me for being empty, yet the only empty things in Oakhaven were your souls." She stepped forward and placed her glowing hands on their foreheads. "You valued your pure lichen blood above all else. Let us see how you fare without it." Driving her ancient magic into their spiritual cores, she forcefully and permanently severed their connection to their inner beasts. They screamed as their lichen strength and heightened senses burned away, reducing them to the very human nulls they had abhorred. Banished to live out their days as powerless beggars in the slums, they faced the ultimate, inescapable karma for their boundless greed. The Alpha King stepped up behind Isolde, wrapping his heavy cloak around her shoulders and pulling her close, as the entire Frost Peak pack bowed in the snow to their king and their true oracle. The oracle and her winter wolf ruled the north, their legacy echoing through history. The treacherous faced their brutal karma, while the rejected rose to supreme power. Did Isolde's revenge satisfy you? Or should she have shown mercy? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this dark fantasy romance captivated you, please like this video, share it with your pack, and subscribe today for more epic, thrilling drama stories.